Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and gapfactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by Brewery X Manscaped. Make sure to use the promo code LAFB20 on manscaped.com for your next purchase on Manscaped. Go to manscaped.com for more details. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And you can, of course, find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you choose to digest your weekly podcast. Dan, I know we've been saying it for the last couple of weeks as far as just NFL purgatory, training camps right around the corner. This couldn't be a more perfect time to bring in the guest we have on the show today. We've had him on previously, and every time that we finish a conversation with this individual, you just want football to start yesterday. It puts you in the mood. So Dan, please, by all means, tell everybody who we have coming on the show today.
Yes, we have an amazing show in store today. We cannot wait to get this episode rolling. Very, very special guest indeed joining us. The pride of South Carolina, one of the smart ones representing Northwestern University, the host of Chargers Weekly, CBS LA anchor, Chargers team reporter, dog dad to Sully, and soon to be girl dad, one of the best friends of the show, as this is now the third time he's joined us, bringing Chargers and LA sports fans amazing content and team insight throughout the year. Chris Hayre has been kind enough to join us again on Chargers Unleashed. Chris, welcome back to the show. Always great having you on, man. Quite the exciting time for this Chargers team. Also, exciting times in the Hayre household as well. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. It's always good to catch up with you guys. Appreciate the introduction. And you're right, Jake. It's like we're in this purgatory period where we've talked about minicamp, we've talked about OTAs, and you just want to get training camp going. So we're less than 2 weeks out. I couldn't be more thrilled to actually see these guys on the grass, and all the stuff that we've talked about, we could actually kind of see get put into action.
We're so close. We are so close. And we got so much to cover on this episode. As you mentioned, exciting times for this team. And we're going to talk all things position battles. We'll talk the Chargers team identity. We're going to talk expectations as we head into training camp. But I don't know. Let's begin with how much of an impact this coaching staff has had on the organization so far. Since Brandon Staley has arrived on this team, he has given the players, the media, most of the fans a ton to talk about with all the coaching mentality and how he approaches the game. I mean, is there anything else you've been able to observe from him now that he has finally gotten the opportunity to get, on the field and kind of carry out mini camps and OTAs?
I think just how prepared he is, and that obviously comes across in his press conferences. And you mentioned he gives the media a lot of time, which in turn gives the fans a lot of time to kind of absorb what he's all about, what he wants this team to be all about. But I get the sense that he's prepared for every situation that's thrown at him. And for a rookie head coach, he had been pretty impressive in the interviews with the NFL teams he talked to, because it seems like he really understands what he wants to be as a head coach, the coaching staff he wanted to bring in, a lot of young guys, a mix of collegiate and NFL experience. And, he said, too, he talked about John Carroll University, and he's like, hey, whatever you want to think, John Carroll University is an NFL operation, and it gets you prepared for the NFL. So, just one little tidbit, it's just an example, is during minicamp, all these guys were getting reps, and he talked about just not standing around, getting guys on the second field, 60, 65 reps as opposed to what you would get in a normal mini camp, 20, 25 reps. And little things like that, you take note of, especially in a season where you have an extra game, the attrition in the NFL, you're going to have to rely on your backups. You're going to have to rely on your rookies to be successful. So the littlest things like that in May where rookies are getting more reps than they would typically get in May, or a second or third year guy who's learning this system. The defensive guys who are learning a completely different system. Justin Herbert, who's learning a new system, and the skilled position players around him, a new offensive line. I found that intriguing that these guys are getting those requisite reps. So when we do get to Jack Hammett Sports Complex in less than 2 weeks, they at least know what to expect. They know what's expected of them, and they can kind of get right into it in a preseason where we have 3 games, and all eyes really, I think, for these starters is going to be on the Washington football team in week 1.
Now, Chris, we've actually gotten a good opportunity, during the mini camps, the OTA period, and obviously this purgatory period, to talk to some of the players. And when they talk about the differences, especially on the defensive side of the ball, we've noticed a consistent phrase that they keep using, and that's being able to play more free and basically refining the mentality of how they're approaching the game. We've heard it from Drew Tranquil. We've heard it from Chris Harris, among others. And what can you tell us as far as what you've observed, and much like you were talking about just now about Brandon Staley's coaching approach, what can you tell us about the approach that Coach Staley and Coach Hill have instilled in this defensive group?
Well, I think a lot of it, honestly, it's an easy out, but it's all to be determined. A lot of it is talk to this point because we haven't really seen a lot. I mean, OTAs and in minicamp, obviously these guys are getting acclimated to a new defense. You hear Coach Staley saying, he wants to put these guys in a position to just be successful. Whatever you're good at, we want you to do that. Using personnel as a weapon. I'll say this though, Gus Bradley had guys play pretty free the last 3 years, and when you didn't have Derwin James the last 2 seasons, and he gets hurt right before the season. I mean, that was just a really tough blow. You go to 2018, that 12-4 team, Derwin James had his fingerprints all over it. So obviously health is going to be paramount, but you're right. I think guys are energized by this new coaching staff. I think when you hear Kenneth Murray talking about wanting to play downhill like he did at Oklahoma, that's something I'm interested in seeing, with the new number 9 jersey. I think Derwin James, his intelligence and his ability to play different positions, to play positionless football, I think that this is going to be a defense really tailor-made for him. Joey Bosa talked about it being kind of an adjustment for him and what he's done his entire career. He's going to drop back in some instances, it sounds like. So it's going to be, I think, a learning curve for a lot of these guys. Chris Harris Jr. said he's played in this, so he has a little bit more of a leg up than some of these guys who are new to this defense. But you're right. The ability to play free, I think players are probably energized by that phrase. And anytime you have something new and everybody has the buy-in, you can't help but be excited and want to dig into that playbook as we get into training camp.
Now, we've talked quite a bit on the show now about position battles and storylines heading into training camp. And obviously, again, we're only 12 days away from that now. What are the main storylines or position battles that you specifically are looking forward to watching?
Ooh, the wide receivers room for me is just awesome. We know where Keenan stands. We know where Mike Williams stands. You drafted Joshua Palmer in the 3rd round for a reason. I'm really excited to see what he looks like in his rookie season. But then you have guys like Tyron Johnson and Jalen Guyton and Joe Reed and KJ Hill. I mean, Prohl you bring in. It's not so much the front end of that room, it's the back end. And I guess it's a matter of, okay, who can we get on the field on 4th down in special teams? And, are you going to carry 5? Are you going to carry 6 receivers? That's the one position that I'm really intrigued by, just because I think there's so much talent there. And, you would hate to see a 6th or 7th receiver get released because of the flashes that you've seen, whether it be in college or last year with this team. So the wide receiver group for me is one I'm certainly going to be watching.
Now, there's a theory that I was thinking about, and this goes all the way back to post-draft, when you take a look at this team where it is now, what they obviously did in free agency, and you're looking to still see, okay, what is it that this team could still use? And a lot of discussion was brought up that maybe the Chargers could still use another piece at the safety position for depth purposes, because obviously you have Nas Adderley and Derwin James as your starters, but behind that, you have most likely sitting Alohi Gilman and Mark Webb. I have a theory that, is there a possibility that a certain player that the Chargers drafted a couple years ago by the name of Kaiser White, I know they like him at the linebacker position. Obviously, he played safety at West Virginia. Have you heard any possibility at all from this defensive staff that they could use Kaiser White as a more depth piece in maybe emergency situations if need be?
It's an interesting thought. First off, they wouldn't tell me, that's for sure. I remember being down in Mobile when Kaiser White was coming out of West Virginia, and you're right. I mean, he has that safety flexibility. I want to say he started 10 or 11 games last year. He had a 15 tackle game against the Saints. I've always liked Kaiser White a lot, and he was actually the starter going into his rookie season. Started the first couple of games, and he got hurt. So he's had injuries kind of derail the first 2 seasons of him being in the NFL, but he's an intriguing name. And, Mark Webb, frankly, is another player I want to see, because Brandon Staley was able to really maximize that roster with the Rams and the secondary pieces there. Alohi Gilman, you mentioned, Mark Webb, those guys, I want to see how they develop this training camp. And, when we're talking position battles, frankly, behind Nas and Derwin, safety is definitely another position to keep your eye on. And, we'll see kind of how Brandon Staley wants to utilize some of these guys. But you're going to have to play special teams. That's the big thing. And, if Mark Webb can get on the field and play special teams, Alohi Gilman can play special teams at a high rate, then you're more than likely to make the team. But with fewer guys coming to camp, you never know what's going to happen during the preseason with surprise cuts, and whether it's the safety position or another position of need that the Chargers may have as we get closer to week 1. We tend to forget about some of those names that all of a sudden are available in late August, and all of a sudden are wearing a new jersey the next week later. So, but Kaiser at safety, I wouldn't put anything past Brandon Staley and what he sees in some of these guys. That he probably has a plan for each player. Like, this is what this guy does best. Maybe it is safety for Kaiser. We'll see.
We're talking to Chris Hayre, Chargers team reporter, host of Chargers Weekly, amazing podcast. Now, Chris, Chargers fans, and I'm sure even folks inside the building, yourself included, have heard for years the expression, it probably makes you cringe a little bit, on paper, when describing the potential of this Chargers team. But for reasons we've all discussed and seen, the potential just hasn't been realized. And that term on paper just makes me cringe a little bit. What about this year's team and this staff leads you to believe that this year could actually be different?
You're right. I don't like the on paper phrase. It's an easy way out. And I think it gets us through the offseason in a lot of ways, because there's probably more than just the Chargers talking about on paper right now. On paper, we could be 12 and, I guess, what is it this year? 17 games, 12-5 or 11-6. I think the one reason why it's different this year for the Chargers is obviously the quarterback position. We know what we're getting in Justin Herbert. Last year, it was Tyrod's job. Justin had essentially no off-season program. So when you know who you have under center, it tends to make the rest of the picture come in focus a little bit. I think Brandon Staley and his pedigree on defense, what he did with the Rams last year, knowing that you're going to have a first-team All-Pro and Derwin James come back, you pair him with Nas in the secondary at the safety position, you got a difference maker really on all three levels. I firmly believe Kenneth Murray is going to take that next step in year 2. I think people forget about Drew Tranquill and the fact that he probably would have had 110 tackles last year had he not gotten hurt in week 1. And, Joey Bosa, maybe the best, just talking with Matt Money Smith a few weeks ago. It's like, this is the best all-around defensive end when it comes to stopping the run and getting after the quarterback. So that's why you should be optimistic if you're a Chargers fan. Now, you're in a division with the Chiefs. I think the Broncos are pretty loaded outside of the quarterback position. The Raiders are a strange team that went 8-8 last year, have a pretty good offense, made a lot of off-season moves. Actually, I had Tashawn Reed from The Athletic on Chargers Weekly this week to talk about the Raiders and kind of everything that they did this offseason, what their expectations are with Gus Bradley running that defense now, and kind of what the forecast is for the Raiders. But it starts with the quarterback position, guys. And I think Brandon Staley has given fans the confidence that he has a plan to make Justin the best quarterback he can be. And he has a track record of success on the defensive side of the ball. So when you add all that stuff together, you can't help but be excited. But unfortunately, it is on paper right now because it's July 15th. There's nothing we can really say or do until we get to Washington. But of course, the excitement's there, and it starts with number 10 under center.
Yeah, and now you've had a ton of time and a chance to spend all kinds of hours with his coaching staff, whether it's on Zoom or on the field. And everyone, I think, has started gushing from probably the first news conference that Staley's had about just the coaching staff's intelligence and their genuine just love for the game. What are some lessons or maybe some golden nuggets that this coaching staff has provided this year that stands out to you that is maybe just different than prior years covering the Chargers team?
It's a good question. I'll say this. For those who haven't heard Darius Swinton, the special teams coordinator, speak, he's awesome. He's, go on the Chargers YouTube channel and check out some of his pressers. The staff has this really unique blend of youth and experience. And, we talk about Ronaldo Hill having that playing experience. I think there's something to be said for a guy who's played the position, who kind of knows how it feels in the middle of August, or knows how it feels, in the middle of an NFL season. And when it comes to practicing and pushing guys and when to push guys, I think the relationship between coach and player is a very open relationship where Brandon Staley's talked about taking input from some of the leadership team of the Chargers and the vets. So having that innovative thinking too. I mentioned Coach Staley seems to know exactly what he wants to accomplish. Well, he brought in guys that can help him do that. And whether it's a guy with playing experience like Ronaldo Hill or a guy who's spent a decade plus with the Hall of Famer and Drew Brees, now helping Justin Herbert along, I really do think it's like a nice blend of youth, experience, guys who have played in the league before, and you bring that together and you have the buy-in, you can have something really special. And I think that's why people are excited. I mean, they've heard from all of these coaches throughout the offseason, spearheaded by Brandon Staley. And when you hear some of them talk, Darius Swinton talking about how guys, the rookies are all contributing on special teams. And he had a saying. He said, if you're going to come to me with a question, don't just come to bring me an apple. Like, don't suck up to me. Like, if you have a legit question that we have not covered, and it seems like these coaches have supplied the players with so much information, from voiceovers to stuff you can bring home. But it's one of those things where, like, don't waste my time. Like, if you have a question, it's legit, we'll accomplish it. But chances are we've covered everything that you need to accomplish on the football field. So things like that's exciting to me, because you could just tell that these guys really want to accomplish really good things here in 2021.
No, it's interesting. You kind of bring up the development a little bit, and we just recently had the host of Locked On Chargers, another podcast, on, and we had talked about kind of the differences or the dichotomy between depth versus development? And like, what is the reason why the team seems to not have as much of an underbelly as you would like to have in like the depth position? So when one man goes down, the difference between talent is very, very large. At least it's seemed these last few years. With this new coaching staff, like what differences have you seen in terms of development specifically of kind of either the younger players or the veterans this year versus past years covering the team with other coaches?
Again, it's hard to say this time because a lot of that stuff is all in the classroom, right? I mean, we have access to OTAs and into mini camp, and the development versus depth. It's an interesting thing. I go back to 2018, and I use this as an example a lot. The reason they were 12-4 was they got contributions out of that rookie class in key moments, and we talk about Derwin James all year long. Justin Jackson in Pittsburgh and Kansas City, Uchenna Nwosu with the strip sack in Baltimore in the wild card round, Justin Jones. I think there's a guy or two I'm probably missing, but they got contributions up and down that draft class. And there's been certain years where we haven't seen that. Like we haven't seen Nas and Derwin play together, period. Jerry Tillery's a guy who, I think Staley's very high on. What can he do in 2021? So, yes, you want to develop players, but at the same time, with that development, you also need them to contribute. There's only so many spots on the roster. You can't just have a guy sitting on the roster to just develop. You need to get contributions out of these guys. So whether it's a guy like Chris Rumph or Nick Neiman or Larry Roundtree, Mark Webb, some of these later round picks, it would be nice to see them both develop and provide some sort of depth this year that can help you get through the course of a 17-game season, because injuries are just inevitable in the NFL. Can you get the depth and also develop guys into the players you ultimately want them to become?
Chris, let's talk about team identity for a second. And I feel that even going all the way back just before the hiring of Brandon Staley, if you take it all the way up from the front office down to where we're sitting at today with the roster just getting ready for to get training camp started, you go through the offseason, you go through all the coaching hires, the free agent additions, the draft picks. It's early, and yes, as you said, it's a TBD scenario right now. But looking at what we've experienced since February to where we are today, what do you feel that you can predict the identity of this team is going to be? And obviously, it's probably not going to be just one answer, I'm assuming. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's going to start with the leaders on the team, and it's going to run through Justin Herbert on offense. But a guy like Corey Linsley, his leadership, when you have guys who have been there, done that, I just love what they did this offseason across the offensive line. Obviously, getting Rashawn Slater, Ode Ibushi, but you bring in Corey Linsley, who's played with Aaron Rodgers, who's played deep into January, Matt Filer, who's done the same, played with a Hall of Famer and Ben Roethlisberger, never been a part of a losing season in the NFL. I think Brandon Staley wants to develop a culture of winning, but having winners on your team. Justin Herbert, I think, is a winner. He's a guy who you can depend on, I think, every Sunday. Derwin James is a winner. Joey Bosa is a winner. So identifying those, I think, core leaders and then having the rest of the team follow those guys. I think that would be, as we sit here in mid-July, would be my best definition of the team identity is really identifying the guys on this roster that are going to relay Brandon Staley's message to the rest of the team when Brandon Staley and the coaching staff aren't there. Chris Harris Jr. is another guy who has that experience, has that Super Bowl experience, has played in this system before, this Vic Fangio type system. So having those core guys kind of trickle down that message to everybody else, I think those guys are already here. Sometimes when you bring in a new coaching staff and you have to rebuild and there's a big overhaul, you got to bring a lot of those dudes in. And sometimes it takes a couple of years. I think those guys are already here. And I do think the coaching staff has the makeup to relay that message to these guys and for that message to get across to the rest of the team.
So Chargers training camp, obviously 12 days away. We're all chomping at the bit, the team and the fans, as well as I'm sure you are, clamoring to get to training camp. You've covered the team now for a bit. What is, for people who have never experienced it before, what is training camp like? What can fans expect, especially this year coming back, considering that they didn't get a chance to experience it last year? And you personally, I know you touched on it a little bit with the wide receiver class, but what are you personally looking forward to seeing?
Well, training camp is always one of my favorite times of the year. Obviously, it may look a little bit different in terms of interaction with players and things like that. I still don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But if you haven't been to Jack Hammond, it's an awesome venue to watch practice and to kind of take everything in. It's the unofficial start of football season. So I encourage everybody to come out, and if we're going to be there, say hi, please. And it's a nice kind of kickoff to what we hope is going to be a successful season for the Chargers. I mentioned some of the position battles. I love watching Keenan Allen and Chris Harris Jr. go toe for toe in training camp. It's one of my favorite things, from last year. And I think it'll be fun for fans to see that, to see Derwin James and Justin Herbert go toe for toe. There are going to be some competitive sessions because you have some competitive players on both sides of the football. So just seeing that kind of iron sharpening iron mentality that we always hear, but it really is true. But that'll be it. And then you got the 49ers coming to town. I think sometimes people don't realize these joint practices, you get so much more out of those than the preseason games. The preseason games are just kind of icing on the cake. Like when the Saints came to town for, that 3 straight years, I mean, the work that they got done against a high caliber opponent in like the heat in August, when you're just scrimmaging. I mean, those are the quality reps that Phillip was getting that he didn't need to get in the game. So, just think of the coaches too. You got like a guy like Kyle Shanahan and Brandon Staley matching wits. When you bring in an opponent like that, that only makes you better. The Chargers aren't going to see the 49ers this year. So to prepare for an NFL season against a team like the Niners and a coaching staff led by Kyle Shanahan, that's another thing I'm excited about, because it's going to I think it'll get the Chargers ready to go for week 1 against the Washington football team.
We cannot get to training camp soon enough. It feels like it's Groundhog Day every day. We're so close. We're like inching towards what seems
though, guys, get your rest though. Like, you don't want it to come immediately. Like, get your rest, because it's going to be a long season. Because once we're there, it's not stopping for a long time. But because I appreciate the little bit of a respite. But I'm right there with you. I'm excited to see everybody, to see these guys back out on the grass in pads. That's when it's about to get really real.
Yep. Chris, Hayre, ladies and gentlemen. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're a very busy man. You got all kinds of stuff going on, both work and life. Where can the good people find all of the work that you do?
I appreciate it. You find me on Twitter at Chris Hayre. We got Chargers Weekly every Thursday. We got some fun stuff cooking up this year on the podcast side. And then I'm also over at CBS LA. Every Thursday we do a Chargers feature, and some other cool stuff that is outside the lane of football. But CBS 2K Cal 9 is your home for the Chargers, and you can kind of get behind the scenes features every Thursday, both at the CBS LA YouTube channel and on Sports Central. So check that out as well.
Chris is everywhere, taking over LA just like the Chargers are. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to have you on the show again. We can't wait to get to training camp and get to the season. You're a friend of the show, and you're welcome anytime, all right?
Appreciate it, guys. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks,
we'll talk
Chris.
to you soon.
All right. See ya.
The Los Angeles Chargers select Rashawn Slater,
Asante Samuel Jr.,
Stop! Oh, I'm stopping y'all boys. That's gonna take me.
Intercepted. Picked off by Michael Davis.
Explosion. Explosiveness from Eckler.
There's RP4.
He blew that up, didn't he?
It is picked off. Nas Adderley. 50-50 ball is 100%. Mike Williams.
Uchenna